Hello, and welcome to Parenting Plan Coordinators Managing Conflict Cases. My name is Jack McMorrow, and we are excited to bring you this MCLE today. The family law section is sponsored by White, Zuckerman, Borowski, Lund, Hunt, and LLP and SoberLink. White Zuckerman, Warowski, Lund, and Hunt provides a wide variety of resources to complete almost any project, large or small. They also provide traditional accounting and tax practice services. We invite you to contact them to discuss your specific accounting needs and learn how they can be of service to you. Learn more at wzwlh.com. SoberLink provides objective, real-time data that can be used to reduce disputes over alcohol consumption, leading to less conflict in custody cases. To help ensure smoother negotiations for a more efficient legal process, consider using SoberLink's trusted alcohol monitoring system to eliminate hearsay and protect your client's best interests. With an unprecedented combination of features, including advanced reporting, facial recognition, tamper resistance, real-time results, and customized testing, the discrete system has been the leader in remote alcohol monitoring since 2011. Learn more at soberlink.com. Just before we get started, I want to thank you all for attending today, and I want to invite you to come back for more CLEs later this month. We have a few coming up that are on international family law issues, and there's also a really great one being put on Friday, January 23 at 12:30. It's Retirement Division Red Flags and Foundational Quadro Basics Issues, brought to you by the BHBA. Before we get started, I now have the pleasure of giving you an introduction to your wonderful speakers today, and I thank them all for presenting to you. Here we have for presenters today, Honorable Margot Hoy, Mary Lund, and Robin Sachs. Judge Margot Hoy brings more than 3 decades of family law experience to her work as a mediator at Signature Resolution, following 11 years on the San Diego Superior Court and 18 years of private practice. As the court's former supervising family law judge, she oversaw 26 departments and pioneered the use of child custody parenting plans. Judge Hoy is widely respected for her approachable style, leadership in family law innovation, and numerous recognitions, including multiple Judicial Officer of the Year awards. Dr. Mary Lund is a Los Angeles-based clinical psychologist with over 25 years of experience mediating family disputes and conducting more than 600 custody evaluations. A UCLA PhD and a former postdoctoral researcher at the University of Cambridge, she is recognized as one of the region's foremost experts on divorce, child adjustment, and family dynamics. Dr. Lund has published widely, trained judicial officers, and served in leadership roles with the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts and other professional organizations. And finally, we have Robin Sachs. Robin Sachs is a criminal attorney and victim advocate with over 25 years of experience as a prosecutor and criminal defense attorney. Known by her clients as the Fixer, she is recognized for her strategic problem solving, investigative acumen, and holistic advocacy. In addition to her legal practice, Robin serves as a consultant, expert witness, interventionalist, and family coach. Trained as both an attorney and a clinical therapist, she brings a therapeutically informed approach to her work, offering clients a unique, compassionate, and effective legal experience. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for presenting. You are in for a treat. This is a wonderful panel. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Jack. And it's kind of an old bio that you guys read of me, but that's all good. My focus and my main work, and I want to say this because really this is all about family law here today, and I don't want to create any confusion that this is about criminal law or something else different than that. Today, we are coming to you to model the village approach, and I am going to start our PowerPoint here in just a minute, but also feel free to put any questions into the chat throughout. We're happy we'll be able to field them. We don't get to see all of you folks out there in terms of bodies on a screen, but feel free to ask us questions, and we will field those as we go. So just starting here from the beginning is, as I said, we are modeling the team approach. Here you have a panel with a retired judge, a lawyer therapist, and a therapist, psychologist who is here. We're coming here to not only talk to you about how to work together, but we actually really do work together. So in order to get a sense of who's in the room and to talk about the topic of parenting plan coordination and hopefully sell you on the idea of why parenting plan coordinators could be a very good intervention for your cases. Want to get a sense of who's actually ever used a PPC. So we're going to launch a poll here and hopefully get kind of some feedback just to get a sense of whether or not you've ever used a PPC in any of your cases. And the goal here today is to help demystify the PPC process. One of the big things that we have found is there's a lot of confusion about PPCs out there in terms of the client world, and there is frankly also a lot of confusion among lawyers about what PPCs do and don't do. And so what we want to do is help be able to talk to you guys about it so that you guys can then share this with your clients. So we have 42% saying yes, 52% said no, and 6% said they've tried and it's never come to pass. So that is kind of very illustrative of what we actually have experienced, is that a lot of people have not used a PPC in their case, and therefore, just like anything else, if you haven't used something, you don't know how it exactly works, and you know, a lot of people take the approach of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But if you have used a PPC, we're going to load up our next question. We are going to ask, who was it? Did you use a retired judge, a lawyer, or mental health professional? And I guess we only give you a single choice here. So if you've had more than one PPC with different type of people, I think just do the one that pops in your head as your connotation of who a PPC is and who the person is. Because one of the things we're going to highlight is that there are different people that can act as a PPC and different strengths that different disciplines bring to the process, even though this is potentially a team process and how the PPC process actually works. So hopefully we can get our results here. So interesting. 61% were mental health providers, and that's probably that's a surprise, I think, to us, because in our conversation that we had in our preparation for this, we were going to try to talk and make a plug as to why more mental health professionals maybe should be PPC. So maybe for those of you who are using PPCs, you guys are ahead of the curve and can help demonstrate that point, because there are definitely cases where a mental health professional can be a very valuable PPC and brings different skills. And then our last question, just to see kind of where you are in the mood on what you think about PPCs. Were they helpful? Yes, no, and this is for everybody. They could be, but I'm skeptical, or there could be, and I'm optimistic. Just want to get a sense of, I mean, there are a lot of different views out there, and I think this may be evolving. So just want to get a sense of who and where your mindset is as you come into this conversation. So if we can get the results of this, we will be ready to jump into learning. Good. So we have 54% saying that they were helpful, 3% saying not helpful, and 17% of they could be, but I'm skeptical. So we'll kind of put those so we have 20% that are no, and I'm skeptical, and 26% being optimistic. So hopefully with this training today, people will feel more optimistic, but in addition, feel like they have a better sense of how to use PPCs and what PPCs are. One thing that I tell people all the time, and we'll jump into more of the details here in a minute, is a lot of people say, especially clients, one of the things that we hear or are I don't want a PPC because I don't want someone to have to I don't want to give up my parental authority. I don't want to have someone make decisions for me. If there is a case that is in litigation in any form or was in litigation in any form or could be in litigation in any form, you have a PPC. That PPC is called the judge. So I try to explain to people that this doesn't usurp parental authority, but allows for potentially decisions to be made earlier, quicker, more expeditiously on particularly things that may be time sensitive and not worthy of filing an RFO or going to court for. But we'll get into all of these details as we go on. And I am going to move us along to the next slide if I can. There we go.
So I'm Mary Lund, and I'm going to talk about systems. So we're going to start out with this cartoon about the elephant, the blind men touching the elephant. It's an old parable. And you see that the guy who's touching the side is saying it's a wall. The guy in back says it's a rope. The ones touching the tusk says it's a spear. None of these are right, but each one of them, it has their point of view about it, and they believe that they're right and aren't talking to each other, so they cannot get the whole. You need all of these things to make the elephant work. And unfortunately, a lot of us in any family law case, we're only touching one part of the elephant, and we don't get information that helps us understand the whole elephant. So then we go on to family systems theory, which may help us. So that's the next slide.
I'm trying to get there. We go.
Complexities. I think that what we're looking for is the family system about definition, conflict, and separation. Robin?
Okay, hold on.
Then we have.
That
one's just the wrong slide.
I think we just have the wrong slide. So why don't we just talk through
I'll just talk about it. So what?
Yeah.
Well, let me try to help you understand what we mean by the family system. So the idea of a family system is that it's a group of interdependent individuals who are all acting and reacting to each other at the same time. And people can end up with sort of individual roles. Like, we've got the achievement-oriented child, and we've got the child who's always getting into problems, and people get labeled in a family and stuck. So the important thing is to remember that you can't understand any one person without understanding their role in the family and how they're reacting to each other. And it's very important in these cases to have information about the whole system, or as much information as you can have. The PPC, by the way, is in a very unique position to gather all that information, because per the stipulation, they should be able to say, I want to talk to this person and get that information. Whereas the judge, by the way, cannot always do that. The judge is constrained and has information filtered through evidence, et cetera, et cetera. So let me just talk about the basic unit in a system is going to be a triangle, not a couple. It's got to be a triangle. And so an easy example and a frequent example in our cases would be the clinging, emotionally dominant mother and the passive but angry father, not that involved, and a child who's anxious and clinging to the mom. So if you just see the anxious child, you might say, well, the only problem in this family is that we have an anxious child. But really, you have to understand that the child may be anxious because they're not just reacting to dad, the angry dad, but the child's anxiety may be made worse because the mom's anxious and clinging to the child. The child is reacting to each parent, but they're also interacting to the parents interacting. They're also acting anxious because they're looking at the parents interacting with each other. A child can be made anxious by observing conflict between the parents. And then there are many other people and many other triangles going on in this system. We're dealing in our work with people in conflict and who are breaking up. And there are some unique things that we need to understand about conflict and how it affects children. Um, One thing that happens in separation is that people's perceptions of each other become exaggerated, and usually they tend, at least in the beginning, and sometimes forever, holding on to a very negative perception of who they are in conflict with. And they find people and information to increase or help solidify that attitude. So they're going to get a whole bunch of cheerleaders. They're going to get their mothers and their therapists and often their attorneys who are going to be their echo chamber, and that happens on each side. So it keeps reinforcing the conflict. You also need to understand that although people say they want to separate and they really can't stand the other person, they also have an underlying drive to keep this going. You can call it negative attachment or something, but these people who keep fighting and fighting and fighting, they're still fixated on each other. And our job often is to create boundaries, but so that they can't keep doing that, acting out the negative part of it. The problem is when you have a child, you can't just completely cut each other off. That's a way of resolving conflict. One way of resolving conflict, and by the way, in Japan, they don't expect divorced parents to have contact with each other, and kids will lose one parent. That's not the way we do it in California or the US. We value the kids having ongoing attachments with both parents. So we have this tension because one way that, or, what comes to mind is that if you don't have to see this person you're in conflict with, then immediately you feel some relief. But in the long run, that's not good for kids because they're going to, first of all, learn that the only way you resolve conflict is to cut off the other person. But secondly, they're going to carry the boogeyman around inside them for the rest of their lives. It's going to lead to unresolved psychological problems, and they'll act it out in their relationships. So it's important over time to resolve the conflict as much as possible and create some structures that allow this kid to go on having two parents. Okay.
So I'm going to go into, and I'm going to resume this share here and talking, and I'm going to address the question that came in the chat about the resources. But before I do that, I want to kind of explain that the collaborative approach that we're suggesting, we'll get there in a second, in the team approach is to really try to help coordination, which then leads to answering the question about how you can sell and deal with PPC in cases where there may be limited resources or after people have spent a great deal of resources just to get to the PPC process. And part of what I have seen and what I think helps kind of sell this process is that, and what I hear from clients who have a PPC that like having a PPC, is that sometimes any answer at least is an answer. What happens with a lot of folks who are in dealing with co-parenting or going to a co-parenting specialist just as from a therapeutic point of view is they can sit here and go week after week after week, and there's no carrot, no stick. There's a carrot, but there's no stick to be an accountability. And one of the biggest complaints that I hear from people is that there is no accountability or oversight. So if we are trying to actually get to resolution, a PPC does have the ability to make expeditious decisions. So what we're looking at is how we can help through a collaborative process by working with these different folks with different expertise to get to the bottom of questions. It can take, for example, you can, have a 5-minute call with the dentist to find out if they use the gas or not for a cavity. that's going to take 5 minutes versus having hours and hours of writing an RFO about whether or not someone should have medical legal decision making just because someone wants gas or not. So the idea is that and to really look at whether or not you're using the level 1, 2, or 3 levels of authority. Level 1 authority on the stipulation really allows for quick decisions on regular everyday things that should not be resource intensive. But you're going to have 20 court dates or 10 court dates to decide whether an exchange should be changed when you can do that by a PPC. So part of what we're looking at in the PPC process is a lot of us mental health folks try to take an assessment and make an assessment of kind of what the levels of conflict with what the cases are. And this will tell you kind of also this lens can be used to, you can equate this to resist refuse cases. You can look at it in terms of conflict. You can also look at it in terms of what the likelihood of or what the expenses may actually be in terms of a case. So borrowing from the theory of a cancer lens, meaning when someone is facing cancer treatment and has been diagnosed with cancer, they often get staged with what type of cancer they have. Is it stage 1, 2, 3, or 4? And that usually, with that diagnosis, then you can create a treatment plan. So think about, stage 1 type of cancer is a small kind of tumor. It's like skin cancer. Zip, 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 pop it off. Oversight. Everybody's going to be fine. It's not in the bloodstream, and it's easily manageable. You go all the way just on the complete other side of the spectrum to stage 4. That's kind of where you're dealing with the tumor that's been in the bloodstream, in the lymphatic stream. You have tried various areas of intervention. This is usually a situation where you're dealing with a terminal situation. You're managing symptoms. You're not necessarily working to cure the disease. And then 2 and 3 are those levels in between. There are cases, and I think a lot of folks give cases to PPCs when it's a 4. When you're at a 4, the idea of actually being able to help repair and diagnose and to cure becomes a lot less. But if you have a PPC who can make decisions when you're dealing with conflict that's in the 2, 3 stage, you start to be able to train the parties, hopefully, to be able to resolve their own conflict and go, okay, I know what the PPC is going to say, so I might as well just do it. And that's when you start saving the money. And I see that with a lot of my clients. Oh, I know what you're going to say, Robin, so I'm just going to agree to it now. That makes things a little bit easier. So that is, if you can conceptualize your cases as what type of people we're doing, you can help manage the expectations and the efficacy of how the PPC process is going to be. Now, I think that one thing in terms of my sales pitch that I'll get back to is that I think a lot of people assume that it has to be a high conflict or resist refuse case for there to be a PPC. There are many cases that are simply single issue PPC type cases. We get along okay 90% of the time, but we can't decide where we want to send our kid to school. We get along 90% of the time, but every now and again there's a history of parental alcohol abuse or mental health issues. So we want eyeballs that in case that person falls off the wagon and something happens, and we just want you to be involved in that scenario. So there are a lot of situations that can be very case specific and single issue that are not necessarily high conflict folks at all, but allow for intervention when one of these kind of vulnerable areas come up. So,
All right. So this kind of leads us into who acts as the PPC, kind of the players in this role as a PPC. First of all, I don't think it's been mentioned, and you probably already know this, but there's no statutory authority for a PPC. This has to come by agreement of the parties. There's excellent stipulations and orders out there that Robin touched on, having level 1, 2, and 3 authority, but this has to come by agreement. And this is where really good lawyers do some real effective work with their clients comes into play. As a judge, there's not a lot of things a judge can do from the bench to get a PPC on a case. We can certainly encourage people, we can throw it out there as an idea, but you can't order it. So from a judge's perspective, I find this to be so valuable when the attorneys can get to this conclusion on their own and get buy-in. So I guess here's part of the sales pitch. Don't wait for the case to get to a number 4 where it's metastasized, because sometimes those cases are, as you know, so far gone. The reason you want a PPC is because you've thrown your arms up in the air and you just don't want to talk to your client anymore. And that really does happen. I was a family law attorney at one time, and I think I experienced maybe a client or two that I finally just felt like I can't help anymore. But you do need the agreement. The people that work in these roles, as you know, are minors counsel. They're trained, but minors counsel may be the person that leads to the need for a PPC. They have a role. Their role is to represent, advocate for a child or children, and they're not to be there to advocate for a parent or gather information for a parent or investigate for a parent. They're there to advocate for a child. So they may be the person who is inviting the PPC into the process. Mediators, when you're mediating a case and everything else is resolved, but these custody issues seem like they're going to go on forever. Might be a 2 or 3 conflict case in the scale, the cancer length. And that might be the mediator saying, hey, this is a great idea. You guys can end up in court for the next 10 years, or you can get a PPC on to teach the parties how to communicate. A lot of this is a lack of communication or inability to communicate, which is very new in the process, in the divorce process. The property issues are over, but the kids aren't going away. There's always going to be the custody issues. So the PPC mediators, a lot of times in my mediation work, I say, hey, let's stay out of court. How about this PPC as the guidance for the next couple of years? Private judges, like I said, private judges can't order the PPC, but private judges, myself, I act as a PPC. I've been on all sides of this. I've been a family law attorney. I've sat in the shoes of an attorney. I've represented the client. I've been a judge who wishes half the time I had PPCs in some of these high conflict cases. And then, of course, I've acted as a PPC in the capacity. It is the ability of a private judge, and that's where it comes in handy in the sense of who you pick as your PPC, whether it is a mental health professional versus a lawyer versus a judge. Know what you need. Some cases don't need the kind of person that you might think, oh, we want this person. For instance, if this case has a lot of mental health issues, you might not want Judge Hoy to be your PPC. You want Dr. Lund or Robin Sachs to be your PPC because they have the extensive mental health knowledge. Now, you may say, I need Judge Hoy because I need somebody who's really good at just making quick decisions, is not afraid to make a decision. That is something I can do. But then I may say, I need somebody who's working from the mental health side. So there is sometimes a PPC will come on and their requirement is, I'm going to do your case, but I need the assistance of a mental health professional because there are those issues. So there's many times in my PPC stipulations, I will say, is there a therapist involved? Because I need that for purposes of working on this case. But you kind of have to know what you need. A PPC well, sometimes, like Robin mentions, the needs are different. If you've got a couple that just needs the quick decisions of, they get along fairly well, but every month or so comes some silly decision of what's the exchange date and time over the Christmas winter break. I just had that. Is it, technically it was midnight. One parent thought, what time should I go get the kid? Midnight? I had to chime in and say, no, that would be inappropriate to pick up children at midnight. Let's make it 8 a.m. and next year you can get those valuable sleeping hours from midnight to 8 a.m. Those are quick decisions that PPCs can make, and you don't have ex partes. They avoid a lot of the court process. Obviously, other people work as PPCs. I'll turn that over to Rob.
And I just to Judge Hoy's point, I will tell you, I have seen many cases where a judge will say, I can't order a PPC, but I really think you should have a PPC. And I would really like for you to have a PPC. And, especially you guys have all heard the term, the frequent flyers, right? Those people that come back and forth into court. Those cases drive judges crazy. And I think the statistics say that 20% of the cases take up 90% of the oxygen in the courthouse and the time. And so we're doing a service to the other litigants who so badly need the judicial time to focus on things that really need to be done. So and also to Judge Hoy's point, I too have made the on certain types of cases. Like if I have a case where I'm a PPC and I know that there's a strong mental health issue, if I need a specialist involved, that is something that you can actually put into your PPC stipulation. And I think it's really important. The question came into the chat. If you have a date certain a PPC will last until, is there a way to switch a mental health PPC during that time? The issue with the PPC stipulation is that whatever you sign is your stipulation, and then everything else has to be subject to a new stipulation. So if you're switching PPCs, you need a new stipulation. If you are having a requirement that something needs to be part of the stipulation, meaning that there's a requirement about a mental health being provider, all of that should be considered, contemplated, and agreed to in advance. And there is a
comment real quick on that.
Sure.
Always be cognizant of the fact that why are we switching PPCs in the middle of the process? Now, your PPC should be like, for instance, if I'm the PPC and I realize this is a mental health heavy case and I'm just not equipped to do it, I should be the one that's saying to the parties and to counsel, you know what, I think you need Dr. Lund, or I think you need somebody else on this case. I'm not the right person for the job. But keep in mind, we all know this when we go to court. The judge doesn't like me. Let's try to get a new judge. Oh, the PPC doesn't like me. Let's try to get a new PPC. So watch out for shopping, so to speak.
Yeah,
too.
Yeah.
that's an excellent point. And one of the points that I just want to make is that PPC stipulation. One of the benefits we have, double benefit, is that the County of Los Angeles has a pre-made PPC suggested stipulation form that Dr. Lund was hugely a part of creating. And it has in there that not every jurisdiction has certain kind of levels of authority for each type of decision. What people often get confused on that stipulation form is that people think, oh, if it's a level 3, that means you can't talk about it. The different levels does not mean that you can't weigh in on an issue. The levels tell you what the PPC needs to do in order to make a recommendation or not. Who needs to be heard, how quick it needs to be done, the notice time, etc. It's a great form. It is in our materials that we've provided today, the stipulation form, but your form can be modified and changed for what your needs are.
And we should do another completely nuts and bolts training on how attorneys understand and can use that PPC stip. For example, people think that those levels of authority have to be all in there. They don't. They can be a level 1 or a level 2. You can change which level, that of authority in any level, in any one point, any one issue. So yeah, we should do that.
Yes, we should do that. And then until we do, I'm a resource. I'm going to offer Dr. Lund as a resource that if you have questions about your stipulations, feel free to reach out to us. Our contact material is there, because really understanding what the stipulation is really important. This is different than co-parenting. It is not co-parenting.
Right.
If you're using a mental health provider, it is a decision. It is a quasi-judicial process that has authority. So just going through the rest of our chart here so that we don't derail too much, there are many other people that are involved in, as we've talked about, some of the legal people, but in addition to the kind of family law people, sometimes in these types of cases, we may find that there's criminal and DVRO, or restraining order counsel. There may be consulting lawyers behind the scenes. There may be jurisdictional issues where you have a New York lawyer, a California lawyer, a Texas lawyer that you may be having to deal with things that have multi-state issues, even though the jurisdiction has been given here. There's also DCFS lawyers. So we're big fans of collaborating here. Lawyers often act more siloed. Mental health providers, we really consult with each other, talk to each other, and we view the lawyers as a valuable member of the team to helping a family to a resolution. Other roles will be explained by Mary.
Okay, so I'm going to start with a mental health professional being a PPC and say that one of the weaknesses of mental health professionals who've done this work that who I have known, is they don't make enough decisions. So if part of your dissatisfaction with the PPC process has been that mental health professionals don't make decisions, uh, that I have to own. And by the way, I made decisions. My husband Angus Strawn, who helped do the PPC stipulation, he was on that committee that developed it. He makes decisions, but it's if you get a mental health professional, make them use the authority that they have and make it clear that they are not to keep trying to mediate past a certain point. They've got to make a decision. So let me go then to, I'm going to use my example of the kid who is clinging to his mother and the angry-ish father and the kind of emotionally clinging mother to talk about these different roles. So one thing that happens many judges in a divorce case will say, oh, the kid needs therapy. Well, that's not going to help. The kid may be anxious and the kid may need therapy, but that's not going to help little Johnny start spending time in dad's house, because there are all kinds of things about the way that this dynamic goes on. But we want to protect little Johnny's therapy if he needs it. Johnny may have had separation problems from both parents when going to preschool. They may have been in family therapy prior to the divorce with a family therapist who's working with both mom and dad to help little Johnny adjust to preschool. And maybe little Johnny has developmental issues, and these parents have been struggling with how to take care of this kid who is anxious for reasons that are temperamental, not necessarily caused by the divorce itself. So let's talk about who's likely to get involved when mom and dad divorce here. Well, quite often they are going to go to individual therapists, or now increasingly divorce coaches. Drives me crazy when they're going to divorce coaches, by the way, influencer divorce coaches. But individual qualified psychotherapists who have ethics still make the mistake of over-identifying with their clients, and they can make problems worse by telling people to keep fighting or protect themselves, or you're right and she's wrong. And so, and it increases the cutoff between the parents. I think one of the most valuable roles, and this is why I'm still doing this in my semi-retirement, is to get a co-parenting therapist. Oh,
sorry.
Okay. Is to get a co-parenting therapist, because it's vitally important to get these people the skills that they need now that they are no longer communicating informally. They need to now do things like make decisions about how little Johnny is going to play soccer. And maybe he really needs that so that he can go on with his life and develop some skills socially. But the parents can't agree on getting him into soccer. So a co-parenting therapist is going to be skilled at trying to get the emotions dealt with and to lower the tone and get them to communicate better. But the co-parenting therapist can't make a decision. They can only try to deal with them voluntarily doing things. And so then maybe what we've got going on here is little Johnny is not going to dad. Maybe dad has remarried, or not remarried, the marriage broke up because he's got involved with another woman and has decided the other woman is immediately going to live with him. And little Johnny is increasingly reluctant to go over there. Well, a reunification therapist who only works with with dad and the kid is not likely to have a lot of success, in my opinion. You need to get the whole team in there. But the reunification therapist is not in a position to make a decision about when little Johnny's going to spend more time with dad. The therapist doing the work can inform the PPC what's going on, but that therapist isn't able, they're going to risk their license if they make a statement about how much time the little Johnny should spend, because that is a custody recommendation. And the PPC can do that. And usually these are long-term cases where they have to get, desensitized and change in short amounts of time spent with the other parent over time. And that is not something that is amenable to court at all. You need, and that might be a good kind of a case for a mental health professional uh, PPC, as are, I think, like baby cases where you have a developing child and you can't really know when the child's ready to spend more time. And maybe a mental health professional might be in a good position to be a PPC because it involves developmental issues and often observation of the child with both parents in order to determine that. I think all of you understand what a custody evaluator is because that is somebody who is a mental health professional who has special training. They're forensically trained, takes years to become one, and lots of effort to remain being an evaluator. But if you were to send little Johnny and family to get an evaluation over the fact that he doesn't want to spend time with dad when he's 6 years old, well, he'll be 7 years old before the evaluation is done and there's a trial on it. So in the meantime, very often the situation gets worse. And so going to a PPC during this process is going to be a more immediate and effective intervention. And then there are, as Robin said, there are many other kinds of mental health services. Children have special needs. They're going to be involved in the regional center. There are going to be behavioral therapists going back and forth to the homes, who might be excellent in terms of their ability to give you information about what goes on in the homes. Their teenagers sometimes have to go to inpatient or outpatient. Sometimes parents need to be maybe dad does really have an anger problem, and maybe the PPC needs to get involved and can't necessarily recommend or order, but can talk to, as Robin said, the family about dad being in therapy, and then the PPC would get information about how's dad doing, in therapy. And then there are other things like especially the child abuse cases, and you get the other more complicated Stewart House involvement and things like that. So that's a brief overview, and often if you know that there are like 10 therapists involved in a case, that is a very bad sign. So
and one of the benefits to having these therapists is having the voice of different people. There is a big difference between how a parent or party or litigant reports what is occurring versus how the person who is actually experiencing it may report it. And so hearing it's very valuable when you hear a party say, this is what happened. And then you hear the other party say, no, this is what happened. And then you talk to the therapist and you hear what they say happened. So you start to be able to develop credibility questions or answer credibility questions. And as Judge Hoy had brought up, there's the ability in the PPC process to really bring in and get the voice of a lot of people that otherwise may never, who have valuable information, who may never, ever make their way. I mean, grandparents can be great sources of information, nannies, teachers, monitors, consultants, sober coaches, pediatricians, dentists, nutritionists, people who are saying, like, a lot of people will say to me, oh, my child's, not overweight. And the other person's, yes, they're overweight. You're feeding them horribly. Well, the nutritionist said this. Well, let me go just in a 2-second call. I can call the nutritionist and say, what did the nutritionist actually say? And that puts an end to that real quick. In terms of what an issue may be. So the question came up in the chat. I'm trying to get the questions out there too, was could a PPC be useful in both co-parenting planning and parental planning? Absolutely. Co-parenting, we've talked a lot about the co-parenting, but particularly a lot of people think that parallel parenting means that you never need to speak to or deal with the other parent. That's just false. There is a reality that there is going to be certain touch points and certain intersections where decisions need to be made, plans need to be made. And in the parallel parenting model, if you have these cases where you're in constant impasse to having decisions and the kids' lives need to go on, a parenting plan coordinator is excellent. I can't tell you how many people are sitting here on, the eve of Thanksgiving having a fight about whether or not the exchange is going to be at Starbucks or Taco Bell. Right. And so, the kid doesn't remember what Thanksgiving was about anymore. All they remember was the fight about Taco Bell or Starbucks. And instead, you just put an end to that. And that is like a level one decision that is easy and not going to take a lot of analysis. So, and just to answer this last question, and then we'll move into the case studies, is what happens if one party does not agree with the PPC decision? The stipulation, and when we do our nuts and bolts, we'll get into this further. The stipulation provides the remedies. You can always go to court. There is nothing about the PPC process that prevents anyone from going to court. There is a period of time that the PPC recommendation becomes an order. And even in that circumstance, even if it becomes an order, there's a way to dispute that order and go to court. You always have judicial oversight. It does not usurp judicial oversight. So please understand that. Bouncing to you, Judge Hoy.
Thank you. Think about that think of it as the Superior Court kind of has appellate rights over the PPC for you lawyers who need it that way. And following up on the co-parenting counselor, some of the cases I do, I actually suggest to the parents, why don't you go work with a co-parenting counselor? Because I think that only just will assist in what we're doing in the case. But what I want to do in the case study is tell you or kind of go to what kind of case, why you would want a PPC in a case, why it's so important. Some of the things that I think about when I'm talking to lawyers and litigants in the mediation process is why would I suggest a PPC for you? Well, number one, I find cost is big. These cases have probably taken a life on of their own. They've hired, maybe they're after a custody evaluation already, and they have spent so much money. They're exhausted. They have litigation fatigue. And sometimes the cost is it is much less. It's two people probably sharing in the cost of one PPC. The PPC can hopefully narrow down the team to the necessity of the people that we need. We might need a child's therapist, but they can collaboratively look at the entire team and figure out what we really need to gather all the information. The PPC also kind of acts as the coach of the team, meaning I've got all these players here that are working with this family, and the PPC can gather the information and kind of package it up and put a nice bow on it so that it's relayed to the parties. Another reason why PPCs would be really beneficial in these kinds of cases, access. How many times have your clients, I just want to talk to the judge? Well, you can't do that. And so access, the PPC is accessible to the parties. They can have an open conversation with the PPC, really spell out why they think what they think, and have an open dialogue with the PPC. And you can't have that with a judge who is making a decision in your case. So access is huge. Quick decisions, that's I think the one I find to be most useful for families. Things that are resolved quickly take on a life of their own. I think Dr. Lund mentioned this. If something really started out small, but it's now been 2-3 months and everybody's talking about it, boy, it's gotten to be big now. It's a huge problem, and facts have probably been exacerbated, and my golly, we are now really in a crisis mode. The fire could have been put out a long time ago. A lot of you as lawyers understand the ex parte process with the courts, and every judge is different, but I can tell you from the feedback I got and sitting as a judge, judges don't always have time to put out the day-to-day fires. And so your ex parte many times could be denied because it's not a true emergency. It's not because the judge doesn't want to help every case, they just can't. And so a PPC can help put out some of these fires. So the ability for quick decisions is really important. It's also a venue for parents to complain. Okay, they get to come in and they just get to speak their mind. They get an open forum to be able to say whatever they want to say, complain about the other side. And the PPC to some degree will they will listen, but to some degree, I think they're trying to redirect the issue. And hey, let's put that one to rest. It really helps the parents get things off their chest. As a lawyer, many of you have walked out of the courtroom, and the one thing I've always heard lawyers say is, why couldn't the court just make a decision? When the judge continues your case on a day where you weren't expecting a continuance, that is the biggest letdown for a party. You want a decision from the court. So the parties want to be heard and they want a decision. They want to move on. And so the PPC will allow people to be heard, have a decision made, and move on to the next thing. The other thing that a PPC has the benefit of doing, as far as in the case studies, is looking and hearing insight from all professionals. This has been touched on, but the PPC can look at everybody, talk to everybody, get releases from minors counsel so I can talk to the child's therapist. Keep in mind, though, there is no privilege for the PPC. PPC's file is fair game. PPC can be subject to examination. And so you have to really trust the person that you select as the PPC, because these are people that have to maintain an organized file. They have to be able to answer questions of the lawyers, because if the case does go to litigation, the PPC is fair game. All the evidentiary objections apply as well. PPCs don't get to get Sanchez evidence in and hearsay evidence in like anyone else. The other thing that the benefit is, I get a lot of PPCs because the lawyers are, quite frankly, I think I said this before, a little bit tired, and they just don't know what else to do. That's a stage 4 case, which it's tough to come into one of those and think, and believe me, I don't have the ego to think that a stage 4 case that maybe Robin's worked on before, Dr. Lund's worked, that I'm going to fix it. I'll try to help, but those cases are sometimes too far gone, and it's unfortunate. Maybe we could have caught them at 2 and 3. People also can be very toxic and split professionals, okay? The splitting of therapists, mom's therapist. I've had cases where the 2 parenting coaches were friends. And then now all of a sudden this case, these parents are so toxic, they don't speak to each other anymore. The PPC can help mend all of that, keep the information objective and flowing, making sure people aren't splitting people. The information that's being shared is the same. We all know the telephone game. The story changes as it goes on. The PPC can be a really useful person in making sure that the message is clear and consistent, and it's not just it's not changing as we hear it from different people. So there's a lot of reasons and a lot of strengths in using one in a case, using PPC in a case that will really help the case move forward and stay out of court. I think most people, I've not met a lot of people who say, gee, I love to go to court. So I think the key for most of these families is to stay out of court and figure out a mechanism to get their family through the day-to-day crises that they seem to create, sometimes for themselves, but it really helps the children move on.
So going into what our case study 2 is really an example, and I think it goes to Judge Hoy's point of everything is fair game from the PPC. So PPCs that are organized, have good files, and frankly have systems, I think do the best and parties respond to them the best, meaning having an organized way of dealing with things. So for example, in my PPC work, I tell my parties what the process is at the beginning of what they need to do to seek an order and the process that they can expect. First step, I'm going to tell them, I will always try to mediate it first. I'm going to try to mediate it and see if they can get to resolution on their own. Number 2, then I give them a period of time of what they can provide, whatever documents or whatever I need to have, depending on the level of decision making and what's required by the stipulation. Then level 3, I will then tell them after I know kind of what documents and what needs to be reviewed, what process it's going to look like so that they know kind of from an expense perspective, a time perspective, what it's going to take to make a decision. So I'm going to offer this for you to look at. I'm not going to go through it right now, but it's an example of a very frequent PPC area that I think comes up a lot is in school recommendations. So for example, here are some of the factors that I look at in terms of making a school decision. Now there's a lot more factors that I look at, including continuity and stability of the kids, the child's development and learning, special education needs, co-parenting logistics and communication, etc. But those are things that I've done in my assessment, but I can provide information to my parties about what they can expect that I'm going to look like. And I will tell you, by telling them what the factors are, sometimes they start to come to their own decision. They start realizing, wait, you know what? I know how this is going to come down. And that's, by the way, the best thing in the world. I love getting fired for not being needed, that they've made the decisions on their own, that they're able to make their own decisions. If we can use this as a objective way to make decisions, it helps people. So there are other interventions also that PPCs can do. And there are more interventions that PPCs frankly can do than what judges can do. And that is, and while judges have the ability to do creative orders, and I'm seeing more and more creative orders, there are certain things that you can actually make a recommendation as a PPC. So I'm going to turn those to Judge Hoy.
And that's a good point. As a PPC versus when I sat as a judge, there are so many different things I can do. As a judge, trust me, there are many times I wish I would have picked up the phone and called some child's therapist and go, okay, what is going on here, right? Or called, somebody, but I can't. I'm right. I have to take evidence in. I have to take admissible evidences and make a decision based on that. As a PPC,
Margot, can I just add to that?
yeah,
A child's therapist will not be able to speak directly to a judge unless both people will sign the consent for them. And so, judges often want to hear from mental health professionals, but they can't do it because they are ethically constrained from doing so, except in extraordinary circumstances. So you can pick up the phone and talk to the therapist, right? And whereas a judge cannot do that.
well, a PPC, I think a PPC still needs the waiver from both parent or the authority from
Yes,
both
but they're
or minor
supposed to give
counsel.
it to you.
Right.
Right, but well, and frankly, you can make a recommendation saying I am recommending that both parents sign the waiver, and then that becomes a recommendation.
Correct. Right. So, like I said, the PPC has so many more tools in my opinion, than I did as a judge. As a judge, we knew that I had the intervention. I could get an evaluation. I think Dr. Lund pointed it out that it starts with child Johnny's 7 and it ends when Johnny's 8.5. And boy, what's happened to Johnny in the meantime? Yeah. So we all know what the problems there are. I'm not saying they're not needed in some cases, they really are. But you need something along the way, I think, and that's what a PPC could be helpful for. Obviously, Minors Counsel is there as an advocate for the children and a voice for the children, and I think that is a useful tool in an intervention. Other experts that we can appoint, educational consultants, things like that are always helpful in certain issues. Counseling, alcohol and drug treatments, SoberLink, one of your sponsors today, is something that is very useful. The one thing I want to make sure going through the list, the monitored visitation, we all know what that is, but the PPC and the special master, the order. When you are getting a PPC, do not agree to a PPC in a stipulation order saying, we appoint Robin Sachs as our PPC, thank you very much, and that's the end of it. You have to make an order telling us what Robin Sachs's authority is. If I get appointed as a PPC and all it says is I'm the PPC and it doesn't tell me I have any authority to do anything in a specific, or it doesn't tell me what my role is, I actually don't want to do that job. I want the parties and counsel to identify in the order what the PPC's rules, our role is, and their authority. That's why the LA form that is in your materials, I think, is so wonderful to give the authority. They still get to pick what they want to give the PPC, what levels of authority for what issues. But I think that is very important. So the order is key. Take a lot of time in drafting your order for the PPC because it's going to follow you for a lot of years, because usually these are 2-year appointments, 3-year appointments, things like that. So make sure you take a lot of time in doing that specialized order of what you want. I know we need to finish, so go ahead. I talked a little bit about that. Next slide.
That's okay. And I'm gonna just pass through this next slide, just talking about that there can be specialized orders. You should also know that the PPC can decline to act on a request. Someone, I've had someone say, Robin, we want you to decide if our kid's going to have surgery. I'm like, yeah, I'm not deciding if your kid's having surgery. That's not happening. That's not something I'm comfortable with. So just because I'm given the authority does not necessarily mean that the PPC will take it. There are other tools that we need to just recognize that get part of the PPC process. We've all been talking about AI, just recognizing that there are other people that are behind the scenes and other tools out there. And we want to just make sure that we're aware of those so that we can be a better PPC. Other things to remember, I turn to Mary.
Am I closing it down now?
Yeah,
Is this
you are closing this down.
Okay, so thank you for coming, by the way, I will say on my behalf. And remember that all of us who work with these very difficult families have to remain open-minded. That I know that we get stuck in our roles in the system, in the broad family law system, but look out for, we need to continue self-assessment, look out for our biases, challenge ourselves, be willing to change our minds, remain vigilant in seeking new information. And these are things that the PPCs do, but we also want to try to get the word out that it takes a village to really try to solve these clients' problems. And the attorneys who are going to be setting up these cases, you're part of that village. And it strikes me that maybe we should be talking about being consultants to attorneys to help set up the PPC process.
And that's the key. Collaboration is key. We are here to model collaboration and we are here to collaborate with you. If you need help, if you have questions about the PPC, feel free to reach out to us. And I thank you too on behalf of all of us.
Thank you.